Waldman. He's a writer for thefootballguys.com, and you can also check out all his great work with the rookie scouting portfolio on mattwaldmanrsp.com. How are you going, Matt?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be on and getting a chance to join you guys.
We appreciate you coming on. We got a high praise from your colleague, Sigmund Bloom. We spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, and he said, you got to get Matt on. So we did.
I'm glad I paid him enough for that to actually happen. So, I'll have to continue those payments.
Yeah, you recently wrote a couple of articles on footballguys.com, players that you believe in and players that you're wary of. We're going to get into that a little bit later. And we'll start with the Arizona running back situation before we do that. Chris Johnson is being brought in for a workout. How does that, for you, affect your thinking of Andre Ellington and then, I guess, David Johnson? I think it's more telling on their backups rather than Ellington.
I agree.
What's your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I think it is far more telling on the backups than it is on Ellington. I think it just tells you that Ellington's durability is a concern. I think that to the staff, Bruce Arians, the head coach, was skeptical that Ellington was ever going to be a leading back. And then when Ellington performed well as a rookie, then Arians went the opposite direction and said that they were going to make him the feature player and they were going to give him the ball a lot, not have any restrictions. And Ellington gutted through an injury-riddled season for 12 games and performed very well, even while playing hurt and behind a bad offensive line and behind a backup quarterback for a good bit of that time before he ended up having to call it quits early. So I think they feel like that this is a good enough team that they need to have somebody who they can plug in right away and either give Ellington a break or be able to sub and carry the load. And I think that Chris Johnson gives you a very similar player to Andre Ellington in terms of style. He's a guy that can hit a hole fast. He is someone that has, that excellent speed and someone who can catch the ball out of the backfield. And Arizona tends to run a gap-based scheme, which is, when you pull a lineman and there's really one designated place to run the ball, and backs with speed are really the players that you're looking for to run that type of an offensive attack. And so you're looking for players who are decisive and don't have to do a lot of creative things. Even though Ellington's capable of that, he's also very good at being able to run those types of plays by and large. And I think that's also something that Chris Johnson has shown an ability to be decent at. So it's a good pick. It just tells you that David Johnson, who I didn't think was quite ready to be a contributor, he's a very good receiver and very athletically talented, but still has to learn to show a little bit of patience, get his footwork a little bit better to conceptually execute certain blocking schemes and get the most yards out of them. He's not quite ready. And then you also see that they're probably not as confident in guys like Derwin Williams or Marion Grice at this stage of the game to be able to come in and provide that same type of big playability that they're looking for whoever they put in the backfield.
Yeah, I agree. What round are you looking at taking Ellington now? Obviously, you mentioned that the Chris Johnson thing obviously affects David Johnson, so you're not bumping Ellington down at all. You're happy to take him at his current ADP?
Yeah, I'm very happy to take him at his ADP. I actually recently did a profile at him in a draft strategy that I often recommend every year, where you look at a block of backs to take one after the other, starting either in the 4th round, but usually in the 5th or 6th round and lasting for, 5 out of 6 rounds. So you're looking for 5 to 6 backs between rounds 4 through 10. And to me, if Andre Ellington is available at the end of the 4th round, if he drops that far, I'm taking him. I think I have him as my 17th rated player overall in this particular draft. And I know that that's high compared to other people, but you have to remember that Ellington started 12 games and was the 9th ranked fantasy running back after 12 games, despite the mess that he was playing with that I highlighted earlier, and while playing hurt. Their offensive line has had upgrades from 2 players. Mike Iupati is one of them, a very fine guard from the San Francisco 49ers. Carson Palmer will be healthy. Andre Ellington will be healthy. To me, I look at this, and it's really a no-brainer to consider him that early in your draft. You're actually getting a deal. To me, he's probably more worth a second-round pick, and you're getting him in the late 3rd or 4th round.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to players that you're a bit more wary of. Le'Veon Bell, who's ADP currently in obviously the 1 or 2, generally the 1st or 2nd pick now that he's had his suspension reduced to 2 games. What's got you so skeptical or wary of Le'Veon?
Sure. And what I did with this article, to give it some context, is that I went round by round with players that I felt a little bit wary about. I just wanted to share something that I emotionally felt, whether I liked or didn't like about them, and there are some players that I feel wary about, but I would still pick them. And Bell certainly fits that description. As I've joked with, Sigmund Bloom likes to joke, your recent guest, that he's a Steelers fan and he didn't like Bell, but I was the one person who was not a Steelers fan who actually has been talking about Bell being a good player since his college days and being well worth the Steelers' decision to pick him. But the reason I'm a little wary of him this year is, even if he misses a couple of games, I tend to have seen bad experiences where players miss 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and then they suffer some sort of minor nagging injury that hurts them for the next 4 to 5 weeks, and then their production suffers. And I'm a little worried that when I'm looking at the first overall pick in my draft, if you're going to miss 2 weeks and you're the first overall pick in my draft, I'm looking for very safe picks that early. Because I'm not really shooting for while I'm going to shoot for a bullseye, I'm also looking for the fact that I don't want to miss wildly in my attempt. And while I think that Bell's still worth picking here, I still have concerns about that elevated chance of having an injury due to missing 2 weeks and maybe not being able to practice with the team. And, that even though it's just 2 weeks, it doesn't take long for you to lose a little bit of your football shape and have some time to have to get back into it. So I don't think it's going to be a huge deal, but in round 1, if there's any player that I'd look at who's rated as a round 1 talent, that might be something I'd be concerned about, it's with Le'Veon Bell's suspension.
So is that safe to assume you don't have him number 1? Who do you have number 1? Adrian Peterson?
I actually do have Bell number 1 in my PPR leagues. I still haven't rated number 1. I just find that when I have a top 3 pick in drafts, I find myself taking him, but there's sometimes that I think about Antonio Brown or Adrian Peterson, and I'm a little bit more inclined to take Adrian Peterson, especially in standard leagues where there's no points per reception, just because of the fact that Peterson has proven, time and time again, just how good and productive that he is. And I don't worry about his conditioning, especially after I doubted that he would be able to come back after the ACL tear and nearly break the single season rushing record after that. So to me, I joked around that there's no Santa Claus in fantasy football. And then when he went off and came down the chimney and gave presents to every fantasy owner, I decided that maybe I am a converted believer.
I agree. And people worry about certain players and they say, but no players, they say that with Frank Gore as well, no 31-year-old running back sort of thing. But players like Peterson and even Peyton Manning with the neck surgery, they're just phenomenal freak athletes. So, I'd back them 99% of the time. So I agree with you that I have no qualms taking Peterson first overall, especially in a standard league, because he's a physical freak and it's not going to worry me. When he's on the field and when he's playing, you know he's going to score points.
Absolutely, and I like your point about Frank Gore. I agree that Frank Gore is a good player this year too. I mean, we had a roundtable at Football Guys recently where one of our writers, Andy Hicks, who's a terrific writer, he brought up the case against him, and I debated that with him because he brought up about 15 to 18 running backs who were great running backs in the league, but then when they moved to a new team and started for that team, they didn't perform well. And I kind of picked that apart. My argument back was to pick apart point by point that none of those players listed were actually slated to be the starter for those teams. And for at least a year or two before on their original team, they did not perform well. They had a huge decline in performance. When you look at Frank Gore, he actually performed very well last year and the year before that and the year before that. And he's coming into this team as the starter. He's not brought in as just depth like Chris Johnson, as you would say, coming in to hopefully not have to play for the Cardinals. They're bringing Frank Gore in because they want him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll move on to Tevin Coleman. He's listed at ADP 71 in your article. And I've mentioned you. I've heard you mention Tevin Coleman a few times on the Audible and things like that. And you do the rookie scouting portfolio. What's your concerns with Coleman, especially in a redraft league for this year or even a dynasty league?
Well, I think there are numerous concerns with him, and the first are probably are ones that you could say are equally concerning for his competition in backfield mate Devonta Freeman. The fact is that the Atlanta Falcons offensive line has not performed well over the past few seasons. One of those reasons is that they've had multiple injuries to their offensive line where they've had to use reserves or switch players to different positions so that they could account for reserve, subs or free agents that they could add to the team at one position, and that type of moving around and lack of continuity hurts a running game more than anything, and that's what they've struggled with over the past few years. And even when they have been healthy, a couple of the picks that the Falcons have made with key offensive linemen haven't panned out where the linemen have developed at the rate that you'd expect. Jake Matthews, the first round pick from last year, is an exception to that, so that's a good thing. But the other issue is that it's also going to be a new system. So now they're playing in what's called an outside zone system, and that requires a lot of communication with the offensive lineman to pick the nearest man and work in tandem. And that takes rapport. It takes some time to develop those types of skills, and especially when you're seeing different types of defenses. Oh. And it can take a season to really figure that out. Still there? Hello? I think I lost these guys. You back?
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
No worries.
Yeah.
We're still recording, but we can edit that out, so that's no worries.
Yeah, I'll edit that out. I don't want to put you through all that work.
Okay. Are we good to go, or do you want to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. So where did we leave off with?
You were mentioning Coleman and then Jake Matthews as well, and the offensive line. And I think you were transitioning into Coleman's, I guess, his running ability and contact.
Yes. So I think I was transitioning first to that when you look at the zone scheme, it takes some rapport to get there. And then when it comes to, with Coleman himself, you have to look at his running style. He has played in an outside zone scheme, so that experience is there for him. But it's on a lower level of college football where there are a lower level of football, which is the college game, where there is a lesser caliber of athlete on the field in terms of per player. And as a result, some of the things that he got away with at Indiana in an outside zone scheme, I have concerns that he will not be able to get away with in the NFL running the same type of scheme, same type of system. And part of it is that he is a very fast player. He's got great long speed and great acceleration, but the body position, you could call maybe the biomechanics of his running style, are not conducive to changing direction in tight spaces or breaking tackles in tight spaces unless he has a big runway, a long or running start to build up that momentum. He just doesn't translate power well, because when you run as a running back, to be able to break tackles, to be able to push a pile, to be able to run through wraps where you don't have a lot of lead time to get that speed up, you have to be able to run where your hips are bent, so that your hips are bent in a position so that you can translate your natural strength into running power. His hips are somewhat too stiff. And as a result of that, when he does drop his pads over his body with those stiff hips, he tends to put his head down. And when you put your head down into contact, you tend to fall over very fast. You can try that on your own and figure that out. But you need to run with your eyes up, your head up when you engage in contact, so that you can drive through some of the contact and fall forward. Darren McFadden, the running back for the Dallas Cowboys, who was drafted by the Oakland Raiders, has that same problem. And he was very much a boom bust player, a player who could give you huge gains if he got a running start and hit a hole fast, which is what a gap scheme allows you to do. But when he was given a zone scheme where he had to be a little bit more creative, a little more patient, couldn't build up that momentum to run through players as often, he had far fewer big plays and tended to get stopped pretty easily, or a lot earlier in runs. And I've seen that, this stiff hip type of style with the pads kind of over the hips, the way that he runs, the way that Tevin Coleman runs, he's not able to change direction in short spaces as effectively. He's not able to generate that power as effectively. And I'm concerned that he may be more of a boom bust player in the NFL than people realize, due to that nature. Now, I could be wrong, because DeMarco Murray I really liked coming out of college, and his style is somewhat on that spectrum, but I felt like he could still functionally bend his hips and just enough to generate that power. Maybe Coleman will be able to do that, but until I see it, I'm not believing it.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I like it. It's very detailed. I like it. I'm staying away from Coleman.
Yeah, Coleman, the entire Atlanta backfield that just hits me.
Just avoid.
Yeah. Moving on to Brashad Perryman, his ADP in your article was 106. You say, you mentioned that he has consistency issues catching the football, and he's running sharp routes. That's the things that are keeping him from nailing down a position, a starting wide receiver position at the Ravens. Is that the only thing that you have? Are those the only problems that you have?
Yeah, they are. They are pretty much the only problems that I have. But let's explain kind of why those problems are important, and why he's not starting right now, and he's not likely to start when the season begins. When you talk about route running, there are multiple components to that. So, oftentimes you'll hear people say, well, he's not a good route runner. Well, there's anywhere between the 20 to 25 different points you could define to route running, and why someone's good, or why he can be good in some situations and not in others, or why he just struggles all the time. And there are three broader, I'll call them subcategories. I'll break it down to three subcategories that Perryman struggles in right now. First of all, is the beginning of the route. And if you're facing a defender who is playing tight to you, which is very common in the NFL, when you play press coverage, you have to be able to get away from that defender and maintain a straight line, a straight path once you get past that defender, so that you can get on top of him and behind him very quickly. Most routes are won within the first 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And he has difficulty right now, like most young receivers, combining techniques with his hands and feet to win against that type of coverage immediately. He's not consistent enough at it yet. He doesn't have enough of these moves mastered to win consistently enough. That will develop with time if he applies himself, and I'm hoping that he will, and most receivers who make in the NFL, that happens. The second area is after you make your move to break towards where the football is going to arrive, called your break. And on that break, it needs to be a fairly flat break, a straight line, to where you're not rounding it off and drifting too far away from the quarterback, and you're not maintaining that straight line. Routes are best run at a very angular approach, and he does not take that angular approach as strictly as he needs to. And what happens is when you round off your route rather than stick that angle sharp enough, the problem that you have is you end up not being at a place where the ball is going to arrive. It's just slightly enough off that the target becomes more challenging to catch because the ball winds up behind you or too far ahead of you. And it's oftentimes the receiver's fault, not the fault of the accuracy of the quarterback. The quarterback threw it to the right spot, but the receiver didn't get to the right spot. As a result, the casual fan sees this and thinks that the ball was a poorly thrown ball, when in fact it's often a poorly run route. He has that issue. When he does, and then that makes the catch point more difficult for him. He has to make a more difficult catch, and he doesn't always get his hands in the position he needs to, and that compounds the issue where he drops passes that he shouldn't. And if he does make the catch, then because he didn't make that break correctly, he sometimes puts himself in a position where he makes the catch, but now he's in a direct line where a defender can hit him, as opposed to where if he broke it the correct way, he could make a seamless catch and turn up field and use that great speed that he's known for. Unfortunately, without all those techniques being mastered yet, his speed, he does not play to his speed, and that's why he's not going to start probably at least for the first half of the season until he shows signs of really learning.
Does that mean that Steve Smith would present good value to you where he's currently being drafted?
Yeah, I'm a huge Steve Smith fan, so to me, I was picking him anyway. But he is terrific value, and to compound that value, you just have to look at the fact that his ADP, his average draft position, was low in the first place because the team announced in the early spring that they were not going to use him full time. They were going to limit his opportunities. But after getting a look at what they drafted in Brashad Perriman and Camp and the rest of the receivers and getting rid of Torrey Smith, they changed their mind. And with a couple weeks ago, they just announced after practices that indeed they would be playing Steve Smith full time this year. They would not be limiting his touches. And I don't think Steve Smith wanted to have his touches limited anyway. So getting a guy who was, I think, the number 17 ranked receiver last year, somewhere in that range, 17 through 20, somewhere in that range, getting him in the 11th or 12th round in some drafts is a pretty great deal.
It's great value. Even taking him, me and you fight over him. Me and Woot fight over him in MFL 10s. Like, we jump to get Steve Smith and Anquan Bolden.
I'm right there with you. And it's funny, I was in a draft with Sigmund Bloom and a couple other people that we do an auction draft. And I saved my money at a certain point to get him, and I joked around talking trash with all these writers that there was no way that they were going to get Steve Smith from me this year. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
Right, we'll go to one last player before we get into players that you believe in at their current ADP. We'll just quickly mention Josh Hill there. Now, he was a June-July love affair, was rising up ADPs, and then some cold water's been poured on that. Wow, that was a really bad stutter. Poured on his hopes for this year in August in training camp. And look, he was solid yesterday, but nothing spectacular. What's your thoughts on Hill?
Yeah, and I think the fact that Hill probably has some issues as a blocker, it might be part of that. Ben Watson is a savvy veteran tight end who's a very good run blocker and a competent receiver, and at one time was one of the better athletes at the position in the NFL when he first was drafted by the New England Patriots years ago. But Hill is a guy that was, I think that the reason that everyone was high on him is that you saw good skills from him as a downfield receiver when he substituted for Jimmy Graham last year and even the year before. But then that love affair for him increased in intensity when Sean Payton said during the offseason that they have always liked Hill's athleticism and that he was a special athlete from the days that they were first looking at him when he was a college athlete. And that really bumped it up. And then when they didn't pick another tight end in the draft, people were assuming that it would be the Josh Hill show. But this is a team that wants to run the ball more. They want to balance out their offense a little bit. And Josh Hill is, Jimmy Graham wasn't a run blocker. Josh Hill certainly is built similar to Jimmy Graham, and having Ben Watson in there probably for a larger percentage of snaps than what people predicted is what's causing the fall for Hill. He's still worthwhile as a late pick, and he may end up proving to be a decent play for teams, especially if you need a second tight end for a bye week. But I certainly am not picking him, as a top 10. I'm probably not going to be picking him as much as a top 10 tight end. I tend to be skipping him where, most of the time and looking for other values that I see.
Yeah, I agree. We'll move on to players that you believe in, and a name that's soaring up draft boards, I think, is CJ Anderson. Based on what happened with Monte Ball last year, people are a bit reluctant to take a Broncos running back in the first round, but running backs with Peyton Manning are always successful. What's your thoughts on CJ Anderson?
It's a good question. I've liked CJ Anderson since he was at Cal. He was a reserve there, but I got a chance to watch him, and I had pretty good scores for him in the rookie scouting portfolio. One of my colleagues, Ryan Riddle, who I often have on the RSP Film Room on my YouTube channel, is a former Cal defensive end, a record holder for them, and watches a lot of Cal football, and also evaluates the draft and does some contributing for the scores in the Madden video game, actually. He was a big fan of CJ Anderson. So we've liked him for a while. I was not a huge fan of Monte Ball. So I did not have him rated highly compared to other people. And I think that what happens is that average draft position, ADP, tends to be a reflection of people's opinions, and those opinions tend to be a year late or on what we see. So, people were a year late to see what Monte Ball was really about, and so they were very high on him. Now they're reacting to the fact that Monte Ball disappointed by applying that disappointment to CJ Anderson, despite the fact that his statistical production in relief of Monte Ball was high enough to make him a top 5 pick.
We lost you there for a while.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. But it cut out when you said average draft position tends to be, and then it just cut out. So
okay,
go back to that.
Okay, yeah, average. I could do that right now. Okay.
Yeah.
Average draft position tends to be a reflection of people's views, and it's usually a view that's formulated from the year before. So Monte Ball was considered a top draft prospect. I didn't like him as much as a lot of people did, but because of that, the view of him being a top draft prospect when he got his full opportunity in year 2 with the Broncos, the expectations were high. When he showed that he wasn't worth that value, now people are looking at that from last year and pinning that to CJ Anderson, despite the fact that CJ Anderson performed like a top 10 running back last year in relief of Monte Ball. So that's why some people were a little bit are sometimes hesitant on Anderson. But what I'm seeing with current ADP, his draft prospects are rising a little bit more and more. I love him. I think he's a good player. And he's a player that I've been drafting in the first or second round in lots of mock drafts that we do with different writers or in leagues where I get a chance for him. I loved when he fell to me where I could pair him with Marshawn Lynch and have him as those two as my 1-2 punch. Nowadays, it looks like that I'm either going to have to pick one or the other, but I would be happy with either back.
Yeah, that's good. And your colleague Cecil Lemmy was very early on CJ Anderson too when he was at Broncos. Yeah,
absolutely.
In our Reality Sports Online
auction last night
that we did, CJ Anderson went for a lot. I think, was he number one? I'm pretty.
Someone nominated him, I think, second overall, and everyone just went ballistic. But I had no salary cap money from last year because I paid Des Bryant way too much money. But I just wanted to throw up the X for 4 years. So
I'm glad you guys are doing Reality Sports. That's exactly the league where I was drafting in with the Steve Smith story. So that's fun.
Yeah,
that's great. I'm glad you guys enjoy that league.
Yeah, no, we really enjoyed it. It's pretty fun. And the rookie draft, I was stoked. I got Amir Abdullah at 6, so I was cheering.
Yeah, there you go.
Speaking of rookies,
great transition.
Amari Cooper, his ADP in your article is 51. Tell us why you believe in him this season.
For the same reasons I don't believe in Rashad Perriman. He's a very good route runner. He's very technically proficient for a rookie, and you can tell that he's technically proficient as a rookie because when two of the better route running receivers ever to play football are raving about him in training camp, that's really the only thing that you're going to get to see, in mini camps and OTAs. That's the only thing you're really going to get to see about that player is how good his route running is. And when Tim Brown and Jerry Rice tell you that this is going to be the next big time NFL wide receiver for the Oakland Raiders, and the Oakland Raiders haven't had a big time NFL wide receiver since those two left the team, that's something to pay attention to. He's very quick. Yeah. And he's very quick. He's sure-handed. He has some drops here and there, actually. He does have some drops on some difficult plays. And sometimes he gets too excited trying to get downfield after the catch, and he'll not look the ball all the way in. But he is very capable of some difficult plays. So that tells you that it's more of a concentration issue than it is a technical issue or a difficulty playing on the big stage. It's not a performance-based issue, because football is very much like a performance. Like if you've ever been in if you've ever done any theater or played music on a stage, you understand that there are certain types of pressures performing in front of an audience, even if you've played college ball, because in the NFL, the level of competition and the people that you're performing with, the margin for error is smaller, the talent's greater, and that increases the pressure. And Amari Cooper has played on a big stage and performed well and come back from, minor mistakes. So you're going to see a player that I think is going to be relied on a lot, who's going to perform well and has the upside to be really a wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 this year. I don't think he's going to reach wide receiver 1 status, but I think he can be a very solid wide receiver 2 in your fantasy lineups this year. And that's exceeding most expectations for rookie wideouts.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me if he did end up a wide receiver 1, because the word that comes to mind is game flow. And this is why I'm we're both, me and Woot, or Woot and I, are reluctant on Latavius Murray. I just think game flow for Cooper is, garbage time is music to fantasy owners' ears, and I think Cooper could rack up a lot of targets late in games.
That's a fantastic point. I'm glad that you bring up game flow for both of those players, and I think that that's probably the most astute observation that you could make for a fantasy owner right there.
I appreciate those comments. I'm blushing a little bit, Matt.
Hey, it's good stuff.
We'll wrap up the show now, because we can't get any better than that.
your comments about Travis Kelce and him somewhat realizing his talent. Yeah, I think everyone this year seems quite high on Travis Kelce. Is there? Can you explain that in further detail why everyone exactly is so thinking the next Gronkowski?
Yeah, this Kelce. People have caught up to what you see from Kelce if you studied him in college. And what makes him such a good prospect is he has that size of Gronkowski. What makes Rob Gronkowski special, as we all know, is that he is both a big athlete, a powerful athlete, but he also is quick and flexible so that he can change direction well, both as a runner and a receiver. And it allows him to play both outside and inside and be both a blocker and a receiver. So he can do so many things to beat you. You can line him up against a variety of defenders, and he has the advantage. Travis Kelce is a similar player. You could see with his tape at the University of Cincinnati that he was on a similar trajectory. He can bend on routes that are often run for receivers and make those types of short changes of direction. He's a very good runner after the catch. He's even faster than Rob Gronkowski, and he makes those difficult plays. So the things that he needed to figure out was maybe run, to get better at running pro style routes, learn to read coverages at the pro level where things are much more disguised, so that he could read whether he was facing man coverage or zone coverage or what type of zone coverage, so he knew what type of route he needed to run before the snap, because those are the things that often trip up receivers early on in their careers, is that mental recognition of the varieties of defensive coverages that are more disguised and more varied than what you see in the college game. So, and then also just the ability to block the top athletes at the line of scrimmage, which he was very good blocker at Cincinnati, but it's a whole other tier once you get to the NFL. So he needed some time to kind of grow into his paws, as you would say. And he showed those flashes last year, which is what got people excited. And this year, the drumbeat continues to be steady and loud that he is performing well. He is performing consistently, and he understands that he should be the go-to guy in this passing offense, and he's calling for the football, and the team is happy to oblige. So getting Travis Kelce in the 3rd or 4th round, it seems to be where his value is, and I endorse taking him at that value.
How high does his ADP have to rise before he begins to lose value in your eyes?
Probably the early 2nd round. I would probably but honestly, saying that, I would say probably the late 2nd round would be where I probably would balk at taking him. I would consider him in the early 3rd round if it was a performance league where I get 1 point per reception. I would consider him, but I'm thinking out loud here. So watch me drop this as I continue the sentence. I would say probably early 3rd round is where I would balk at taking him. And after the mid third round and later, I would absolutely take him. Anything below the mid 3rd round, I probably would pass.
Is that in a standard 10 league or 10-man league, 12-man league?
It would be in a 12-man league, in a point per reception league, in a standard 10-man league or standard 12-man league where you didn't have points per reception. I would probably wait until the 4th or 5th round to take him, and I probably wouldn't go any higher than the late 4th.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right to me.
Yeah, it's pretty accurate.
Another sort of situation, you mentioned 2 of these players in your article, and I just want to address it as a whole. You're high on both Isaiah Crowell, and pardon my Australian accent, and Duke Johnson. And in your article, you mentioned Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill in similar vein. Why the love for the Browns, the running backs? Obviously the offensive line has a huge amount of say in that.
Yes, it does, and I think that that's where you have to start. And I think that this is a good tip for anybody who is trying to study running games. Is that good running games thrive because you have a good center. Look at who the center is in that offense, and whether they've played multiple years for that team, and whether they play well. And Alex Mack is a good center. And for the Browns, and when he was healthy last year, the Browns were dominant on the ground against some tough teams. When he got hurt, the ground game faltered. And the reason for that is that the center is the one responsible for making the line calls before the snap and communicating with the rest of his team. And most of your interior runs are also based off of what the center and maybe a second player, one of the guards. So if you have a good center, you tend to be able to run the ball well, even if you have some minor weak spots at one or two other positions on the offensive line. So the Browns have this strong running game. Isaiah Crowell is a very talented player, and he's the type of player that has that feature back size. He has excellent burst in that 5 to 15 yard range, and that's what's important. You mentioned Amir Abdullah. For football players overall, but especially for skill players like running backs and receivers, it's not how fast they run a 40 that always matters. It's really how fast they are within the range of the first 5 to 15 yards. Most of their assignments and most of their responsibilities come within that space. And if you're really quick in that range and really explosive and powerful in that range, you tend to have a better chance to win your role. And Isaiah Crowell has that strength, size, burst, and ability to change direction. And he's smart with the way he runs the football. His biggest issue has been maturity. Does he work hard enough? Does he consistently want to play through bumps and bruises that top running backs play through? And he was an undrafted free agent for some of those reasons, in addition to the fact that he got in trouble early in his career. He was considered the top running back prospect entering college football when he first arrived at the University of Georgia, but then he got in trouble enough in the first year to get kicked off the team and had to play for a much smaller college team, or a much lower profile team. And even then, his coach was a former NFL player who told the media that this is a guy with all the talent in the world, but he has to learn how to be consistent with practice and show effort on a regular basis. And right now, his coaches are saying he's healthy, he's in shape, he looks good, but he has the opportunity to take this job and basically nail it down and win it and run away with it, but he hasn't done so yet. And a lot of it has to do with that playing with bumps and bruises, high effort consistently in practice. And coaches like that, because most coaches have learned over the years, teaching players over and over again, that you don't need the greatest ability to be a great part of a team and to build a great team. And they also tend to be failed players. So, or not failed players, but players who weren't great, but who were had to learn those types of things like discipline and effort to be good contributors, and didn't rely solely on natural ability. So I like Crowell for that reason. I think that he'll probably, that even though he's not that type of player in terms of the effort, he's healthy, he's talented. He will probably have a role as at least a goal line back, and at least splitting time with a player like Duke Johnson, who is also very talented in his own right, and has good burst and versatility. And I can just see them having that split where, like Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard, that they could both be top 20 backs or top 25 backs in fantasy because their line's good and the team wants to run the ball.
Yeah, I agree. We lost you there for a little bit, but I know on your end it's still recording, so we're all good. But we've got a couple of last questions. We'll stow away from your article. An interesting topic that comes up in drafts is Mike Wallace v. Charles Johnson. for us, I think it was you that said on the audible that you take the last person, or once one's been taken, you take the remainder. Is that the approach you're still taking?
It is. It is, because I think both will perform well. And I would say that Wallace is probably the one that deserves the higher rating, even though the general consensus is that he didn't play with the best effort. That he didn't play with the best effort last year, and that's why he was basically run out of town. But Wallace is a savvy veteran who still has great athleticism, and he's playing a role in the Minnesota offense where he will be the primary receiver. That said, Teddy Bridgewater is a good enough quarterback to spread the ball around, find the second open man or the third open man, and Charles Johnson has the kind of physical talent and budding technical skills where, he's built a lot like Josh Gordon, the former Browns receiver who was, such a talented player. He has that kind of physical talent. Now, if he can develop, close enough to Josh Gordon's talent, skill technically, and conceptually for the game and the position, eventually Johnson will outproduce Wallace or be the main guy in this offense. But this year, I would say it's going to be a little bit more of an even split.
Yeah, I just find the Mike Wallace, I think people just see his name and cringe, but he quietly had a 10-touchdown season and 862 yards with the worst deep thrower, arguably the worst deep thrower in the league. I think with Teddy Bridgewater, I expect similar numbers, especially with teams focused on Adrian Peterson.
He helped me win my reality sports league last year, so there you go.
See, and I agree. I think it's a great point that you bring up with the touchdowns. Also just with balance with offense, and it's always a good thing to look at how the offense is trying to beat the defense and use that counterbalance or complement to put the defense in a bind. And you outlined that point perfectly with Adrian Peterson, and also, while Bridgewater hasn't been known to be a great deep ball thrower, he has very good anticipation. I think he continues to work at his craft, and I think that he will show a little bit better skill than even Ryan Tannehill has shown in that area, because I agree with you. Tannehill has not been a good deep ball thrower, and it's going to be interesting to see how well he performs with some of the deep ball threats that he has now, because that's going to ultimately make or break his career, because they're surrounding him with quality weapons. And if he can't get it done with Devontae Parker and Kenny Stills down the line, that may come to the point where 3 to 4 years from now we're going to be wondering, we're going to either be talking about how good Ryan Tannehill has been, or what a disappointment he was.
Well, we've loved having you on, Matt. But before we let you go, live your life.
Oh, he's got Matt Harlan on later. Reception Perception. He's speaking to Matt.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Happy to be on the undercard for Charlie, not Matt. Charlie is my dog.
And I will tell Matt that with glee. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, Charlie is the star.
A little soundbite.
Yes.
Yes. Before we let you go, can you give us a couple of sleepers to help?
People love sleepers.
Yeah, to help everyone win their league.
Sure. Let's look at a couple of guys that would fit that description. I think that Doug Martin, the running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, is going to have a fairly good rebound year, and people are going to be down on him because he's had 2 bad years after a terrific rookie season. His offensive line has 2 rookies starting for him, and they've got a rookie quarterback, and the defense hasn't been all that great. So you wonder about game flow. But let's think about some of the counter arguments for that. Number one, last year they had Evan Dietrich Smith play center and Logan Mankins at left guard. Logan Mankins is a good football player who did a good job for the New England Patriots for a number of years. And this will be the second year that this center and left guard combo will be together and on the field. So there will be some rapport there. So the interior running game should still be intact. Number 2, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are playing in a division where the only good defense that they will face is the Carolina Panthers. The Atlanta Falcons defense may be improved, but I don't think that they're going to be quite good enough to say that they're a good defense yet. And the New Orleans Saints still struggled last year. That's 4 games with 2 teams that gave up some of the highest number of fantasy points for running backs per week of any team in the NFL, any teams in the NFL last year. So that's 4 games. There's going to be another 6 games or 6 teams that they will face who also were in the top 13 of running back points allowed in fantasy last year. So, and I don't, any of those teams I saw, maybe one of them, the Bengals, now have Geno Smith back to form. The rest, I don't see huge upgrades just yet. So the schedule is favorable. Then you have to look at the fact that Doug Martin was injured in 2013, and last year he was overweight and didn't play extremely well. And this year he is back in shape, and he's played well enough that despite the fact that Tampa Bay drafted Charles Sims last year and anointed him their future, Doug Martin has come and impressed so early on that they declared him the starter. I think it was 2 weeks ago. There wasn't even a competition. It was just like, he's our feature back. He's our lead guy. Now we just got to block for him, and that says to you right then and there that he came in and just tore it up and looks like the guy of old. And third or fourth, then you have to understand that their offensive coordinator is Dirk Cutter. Dirk Cutter was the offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons. And while he got fired from that gig, a lot of that had to do with that their offensive line was horrible. And I watch that team every week. And I'm not a fan. I just do it for football guys. When I watch that team, he did amazing work to keep that offensive competitive and to keep Matt Ryan from getting killed, despite losing that offensive line. And so here's a guy that saw enough of Doug Martin, even an out-of-shape Doug Martin, to plead with the coaching staff that he just joined that you have to keep Doug Martin. I'll put my almost, it's not like he put his job on the line, but it was said that he made a big deal to the organization that said, keep Doug Martin. He's the most talented running back we have on this team. And I wouldn't be surprised if he said he's one of the most talented players they have on that team. So when I put all that together, Martin to me is a guy that you really got to look at as a sleeper. I think that Marvin Jones is another good sleeper out of Cincinnati. He's the wide receiver who was ranked 21st 2 years ago. Excellent route runner, can win the ball in tight coverage, has A.J. Green on the opposite side, so he should see a lot of single coverage. And with Tyler Eifert in the middle, this is a passing offense that I think that could be a lot better this year, even with Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton's issue isn't necessarily that he can't play. The issue is that he's not very good in the playoffs, and he hasn't played well under pressure in those types of games, but he still produces well for you as a fantasy owner. And then the third one I'll mention is Dorial Green-Beckham, who is just, the wide receiver for the Titans, who I would just take a chance on late because he's so talented. He's the type of player that can do things that a lot of options can't do, in terms of winning the ball in tight coverage and making great plays. So he may not have great weeks every week, but he may have some really big weeks enough times that it can make a difference for your team. Yeah,
fair enough. We've got one last question. I just want to ask you, because we are Australian. We have an Australian former rugby league player, Jared Hayne, who's on the 49ers roster at the moment. Have you heard anything about that or followed that story at all?
I unfortunately have not. Okay. I wish I could, but I have not heard anything. But it's always a fun story to get a chance to see players who come from origins where maybe football is not the mainstream, and see them go for a dream like that. So I'm very, I'm rooting for him, and I'm hoping that it works out. And I know that I'll casually at least be able to keep up, and hopefully I'll get a chance to maybe even see more and give you a take another time.
Perfect. That sounds good to us. Thank you very much for coming on, and we really appreciate you speaking to us. And keep up the good work with Football Guys.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to speaking with you guys again. You guys do great work.
Yeah, we'll have to get you back on when you're doing the rookie scout portfolio in the lead up to the draft. So we'll have to speak some draft action with you following the end of the season. But that's so far away, but.
Well, I always love that. It's draft time for me all the time, but I understand. So,
yeah. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you so much.
You guys have a good day.